Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back to another AQCOLOR webinar. My name is Richie and with me is the talented Mr. Colin Smith. So before we start, I have a few updates to share from BenQ. First and foremost is our Four Elements Design Contest. This contest is an opportunity for all digital creators to show your unique skills and bring your imagination to life. Embrace the elements and share your elemental work with us for the opportunity to win some sweet prizes. I think grand prize is $1,000 cash or $1,000 total value. The campaign is soon ending. It's wrapping up. The end date is September 16th, and more information can be found at BenQ's website. I'll go ahead and link it in the chat for you all here for y'all to take a look at your earliest convenience. We also have a Nightscaper photo conference that you all may have seen in your emails about a month ago. So we're thrilled to announce that BenQ will be a proud sponsor there. Art is Right. He's going to be there presenting. It's going to be between September 26th through September 29th in Kanab, Utah. And then, oh, Katrina, speaker at Nightscaper. Awesome. There you guys go. If you have any questions on it, Katrina will be able to hype it up even more. So in this webinar, Colin's going to go over the latest features in Lightroom that can transform ordinary photos into stunning works of art. Colin will also share invaluable tips and tricks and help you edit quicker and more efficiently. All right, take it away, Colin. All
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. Hey guys, good to see you all. I see a couple of familiar people there. Good to see you, Katrina, Andrew. Shout out there. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at Lightroom right now. I'm going to be using Lightroom Classic. Hopefully you can see that on your screen right now. If you can't see that, just pop that up in the chat and we'll fix it. But we're going to be looking at some of the new features. We're going to be focusing on the masks, but we're not just going to look at masks. We're going to look at some of the other features too. And I think what a good way to kick it off is let's have a look at generative remove, because this is the newest tool inside of Lightroom that everyone is super excited about. So let's go in here and I'm going to go ahead and remove something. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do something else first if I put it in this folder. Fun when I'm doing these live. This will work nicely. Okay, so let's go into the develop module. And here's a shot of New York City. And you can see there's a little bit of distraction here. I saw this cab and I was like, man, what a cool cab. But obviously I couldn't tell everyone to move out of the background. So if we go into the remove tools here inside of Lightroom, and by the way, if you're using Camera Raw, these tools are exactly the same inside of Camera Raw. In fact, Camera Raw and Lightroom share the same processing engine. So even the Lightroom, the non-classic version of Lightroom, the other version of Lightroom, I keep changing the name all the time. That one has a lot of the very same tools as well. But as I was mentioning, I have the latest version here of Lightroom Classic. All right, so if we look at this, there's two options here. There's generative AI and then there's object aware. Let me just turn these two off just really quick. So you'll see there's different remove tools, but what happened in the previous version of Lightroom, that would have been the 2023 update, they did some new things with the remove tool and made the remove tool better. Right now, I've turned off the brand new options and I'm just going to show you. This is the old remove tool where you would just kind of make a selection around things and then you would just kind of hope it could do a good job. And, sometimes it worked well and sometimes it didn't. So what we have is we have the generative AI now, which is using the, Adobe Firefly to remove it, but also we have the option to do object aware. So let me just turn the generative off first and we'll start object aware. What that does is it just kind of helps it kind of see things that we're trying to remove. In this case, didn't do much, but that's fine. And if I hit apply, this is what we get. This is without the generative, and it's not really getting us what we want, is it? So with the generative AI, what this is doing is I'll just make the selection around here again. And then what it does is see how that when I turned that option on there, it just kind of tried to find around there, but we can also modify this so we can add or subtract from here. So if there's areas we want to add to this, like maybe these areas here, Don't worry about it being a loose selection. It doesn't have to be perfect all the way around the car or anything like that. And then when we're ready, when we're finished refining it, we just hit apply. And now it's going to be using generative fill right here inside of Lightroom Classic. And as you can see there, it did a much, much better job. It actually generated some stuff in the background. I'm not sure what kind of a vehicle that is, but we also have the option to go into variations. So we could go to a second or a third variation. I think the third variation is probably looking the best. And so we can try different things. Now we can also use it for little things like picking up some litter. And let's just kind of try some of that there. And then we're just going to apply it again. And so for a lot of, kind of quick generative removal things, this can save us having to go into Photoshop. So previously, for this kind of work, we would have to go into Photoshop and kind of run it in there to get it a little bit better. But look at that, got rid of the trash. And once again, we can go through the variations. Let's have a look at this car. Maybe we don't want that there anymore, and we can just apply it. Now, notice there, the auto select, see how that did a pretty good job of finding the outline or the shape of that car. And then we go, and so we can just go here. And as you can see, we can quickly go through. Now, one of the things I wanted to experiment with this is I was wondering, okay, how good does this work? So we're going to turn on the object aware in the generative. The object aware is what detects the edges. So I'm just going to run a rough selection over Brooke. This is our model here. She actually used to be my marketing manager. And if we release here, look at that. Notice it did a good job of selecting all of that. And then we're just going to hit apply. And let's see where we go here. And as you can see, now, would you really need to do this? Would you be wanting to, remove the model and just keep a blank seamless? Probably not. But as you can see, it really is powerful. And I just wanted to kind of show you that just as a way to just kind of say, hey, this is what it's capable of, whether or not you need to go to that extent. Now, I could continue. I could remove these stands. I could remove the seamless. I could remove the light flare. It's just an incredibly powerful tool in here. So I'm actually quite happy that we have that. All right. So the next thing I want to do is before we jump into some masking stuff, there's another useful tool here, and this is point color. So some of you may or may not be aware of it, but it's actually really useful for getting rid of things like color casts. So say, for example, if we look at this particular shot of this vintage camera, there's a light somewhere, and people say, well, why don't you just turn the light off? Well, I'd love to, but I was in a museum, so I didn't have the authority to just go turn lights on and off. So as you can see, we've got reflections here, but we've also got color contamination in the shadows. We've got reflections here in the dish, in the flash, and it could be quite cumbersome trying to get rid of that. So let's have a look, and we're going to go to the setting for that. And let's just go down to our just got to remember where they put it. I believe there we go, under the color mixer. And so here's the point color here. So what we're going to do is grab this eyedropper. And then what we can do with this eyedropper is we're going to select the color that we want to modify. So what makes this unique over some of the other color tools inside of Lightroom is in Lightroom we can change different things, but this gives us the ability to select a specific color with 3 different degrees. We can use the hue, saturation, and luminance. So hue is the color, saturation is the amount of color, and then the luminance obviously is the brightness. So we can use all of these to help us make that selection. So let's go into the camera here, and we're going to select this color. And notice the loop appears automatically, which really helps. So I'm going to click. And if you look, this is the sampled color that we have here. There's our hue and our saturation and our brightness. We can see we can change it here too. Luma would be our brightness or luminosity. All right, so what we can do is we can shift any of these. So there's our sampled color. And I want to say, you know what? I'm going to shift the saturation. I'm going to take the saturation all the way down. And notice, as we reduce that saturation or we move it all the way down, Notice what it's doing is it's removing it from that color. We're not losing any of the other colors. We're not losing the red in the Kodak or anything else. But look at this. See how it's cleaned up there? The shadow's looking a lot better. But we can also refine this. So if we go down here, we have the range option, and it might be collapsed on yours. And if we have visualize range, you can actually see what's being selected would be the color area. Everything else now is black and white, and we can see the color is what's being selected. Now we have the ability to go in here. As I said, we can increase this, we can boost it, or we can reduce it. So kind of spread it, but we can also use these three degrees here. We can use hue. So if we want to kind of slide that over, we can be selecting different hues. See that? Or we can expand the amount of hues being selected. So that means we're actually getting more colors. And same thing with the saturation. So if we want the less saturated areas, or we want the more saturated areas, or we want to increase, or we can clamp this down. And this gives us another option, to really just get in there. Obviously, we don't want to do that. But if you wanted to target a very specific color, notice the color area. Now it's very, very precise. So this just enables us to select these different colors. And once again, luminance would be our darkness values. So we can spread that. I notice there's a little bit there. See, it's picking some of that, and it's picking some of that up in the shadow. So that's looking quite nice. If we turn the visualize off, we can see that shadow is much, much better. Look at that. It's super cleaned up now. And some of these other areas. There might be a little bit of salmon kind of color in here, and that's fine. Because what we can do with this is we can go in and we can select a second color. And if you look on the swashes, there's our first color that's selected. I could click on that and modify it. Or there's our second color now. So I'm just going to take the saturation and I'm just going to pop that off. Look at that. And of course, we can expand that range. Let's increase our hue range. And you can see how it's just kind of affecting different parts of it. There we go. Look at that. That's definitely affecting it more. And if you want, you can even use a third color. So let's go in, grab that third color, pull that saturation down, and look at that. So if we look at this and we go before, look at all that color cast on there, and after, we're able to completely remove that color cast. Now, there's other things we can do. Obviously, I'm just pulling the saturation all the way down. I could replace it. I could increase the saturation. Well, let's grab this one just to show you. I could increase that saturation. Look at that. And we can shift the hue to different hues. And the reason I'm showing you this is sometimes you could have color contamination, or maybe you've got split lighting. So you've got lighting coming from our main light, and then maybe there's, another light kind of spilling in. So we can select that and we can even out that lighting. Or if you have two lights, maybe you've got some window light coming in and then you've got some artificial light that you're not able to balance with that window light, you could make them match just by using this tool. You can also just move colors in, different objects. If you wanted to just kind of, maybe you're doing food photography, the food doesn't look too appetizing, you could just kind of tweak it. There's a lot of things we could use this for. And I just like to do it to remove the color cast, because then it's just very, very easy for you guys to see what's going on there. So anyway, that's another tool we have here at our disposal. So I've got some other new features that we're going to look at in a moment. But first of all, why don't we jump in and look at a little bit of what we can do with the masks inside of Lightroom. And once again, same in Camera Raw. So let's grab this photo here. And the sky obviously looks great. Foreground is completely, just very, very dark. So, we could go into the adjustments, and I'm hitting the develop module here. So here's the thing. If I wanted to, increase the exposure and maybe open up those shadows, I could do that. And maybe I could recover the highlights and do a pretty good job. That's actually not bad. I think I was shot that on my Sony A1, which actually has an incredible amount of dynamic range. So I'm quite fortunate to have that. But let me reset this. Another way to do this is I like the sky. I don't want to lose any of that beautiful cloud detail here. And that's why I actually shot it for the sky, for the clouds, because I just really love this cloud pattern, but I want to brighten up the foreground. So we could go to the mask. In the past, we would use a brush and we would just paint with a brush, and we would use, the refine edge kind of on it. But anyway, what we can do is we can choose the sky. So we've selected the sky right now, and I want everything but the sky. So the reason that's why I chose the sky, because we can just go into this mask panel. By the way, for those of you who are not familiar with it, I think most of you probably are at this point, but the mask panel is a floating panel that we can move anywhere we want. If we want to dock it on our interface, we just go over the interface and we can dock it there, and it will just kind of sit in there. I like to have it floating most of the time. Right now, I'm running a lower resolution. Obviously, this is a 4K monitor. This is the SW321C BenQ monitor. And so normally I would run this on a 4K or maybe a 2.7 or somewhere around there. But in this case, I'm running it 1920 by 1080 for the screen cast here. So there's a lot more interface than what I'm used to. But anyway, let's go ahead. So now we've got that mask selected, and we can see there's our sky there. We have the ability to go through on the sky. And let's just go there, and I want to invert that. So now that I've inverted, I've selected everything but the sky. So now I can go ahead and I can just open up these shadows, and I can just kind of bring back, maybe I want to just bring this back, almost like it's daytime if I want. I'm not going to do that because I think it would look a little fake, but I just want to bring back some of that detail so we can see, okay, there's something there. It's not just this black silhouette. And I think, at this point, I'm pretty happy with that. Now, if I wanted to get out of the mask and adjust everything else, I would just go onto the adjustment slider here. And notice if I want to brighten everything, notice everything moves together, the mask and the rest of the image. So if I wanted to, maybe warm it up a little bit or do some other work to it, I could still do that. And at any time, if I click the mask icon, I can go back to this mask and I can make modifications to that mask. If we wanted to do that, maybe drop the contrast down. And as you can see, we have separate control. Okay, this is just kind of looking at it very basically. There's a lot of other things that we can do with this mask here. Oh, it's an extra HUD going on right now. Okay, I just saw the comments there. All right. Okay, so the next thing I could do is, and this is a newer addition to the mask, is if I want to change the color of clothing, say, for example. So if we go to the develop module here, and let's grab a mask. And I'm not going to do subjects, I'm going to do people. And you'll notice here, it will automatically detect the person. If there's more than one person, it will detect more than one person in here, and it will show person one, person two, etc. Now, what we want to do is click on the person, and we have the option to do different parts of the mask. If you just want everything as an object or just as a subject, you would just choose entire person. But here's a little tip. If you're going to use the entire person, don't use select person, use select subject, because in my experience, 80% of the time, I made up that number. It could be 90, it could be 100, it could be 70, but more often than not, the object selection is actually going to do select subject does a better job than person. So just throwing that out there. But the powerful thing about doing the person is we can break it down to different parts of the person. And the newest one that was added, there was two, was facial hair, which we're obviously not going to do much with her. And it's not going to show up because there is no facial hair in this particular one. But if it did detect that, it would show it if there was a beard. In this case, we're going to do clothes. And it's going to select her clothing. And it's got better. When this first came out for the clothing selection, it was really bad, but it's actually got better with some updates. So I'm going to choose create mask. And now her shirt is selected. And let's see if we can change it to a more exciting color, like maybe go for some kind of bluish kind of a tone or something. Now, notice it doesn't have much punch to it. So here's the thing. Use this with the tone, because part of the color, of course, or the perception of color is also luminosity. So we could go into the exposure here and we could darken it or we could lighten it if we wanted to go for a white or a black. See that? So I'm going to pull that down a little bit. And then we're also going to take the saturation, and we're going to boost that saturation. So I'm going to boost the saturation. And now let's see what we can do here. Maybe play around a little bit more with that exposure. And we're looking for something that might be more of a blue. There we go. Another thing that's interesting too is this temperature can also affect it. Look at this. If we want a brighter blue even, we can do that. And we just tweak that hue. And we're almost there, maybe a little bit right there. Okay, so we've got something similar to, I would call this a Photoshop Cafe blue. This is the blue in my logo. All right, but notice it's not perfect. The nice thing about this is let's just go up to 100%, and we can just zoom in here. Spacebar will enable us to move around. So what we can do with the mask is we have the ability to add or subtract from here. And we can use any of the masking tools. So if I choose add, what I want to do is I want to grab the brush. So I'm going to choose the brush. Now notice that the mask can be collapsed or open, and these are the components. And we can really stack up a lot of different components here inside of the mask. In this case, we're using a brush, and we're going to add. If I chose to subtract, you'd see a little minus by it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn auto mask on, and that's going to kind of try to detect those edges. And I can go in here and I can just kind of add to those areas and say, hey, I want some more blue in here. Went a little bit over in the arm. If I want to fix the area I went over, if I held down the Alt or the Option key, it'll switch to a minus, and I can go there. Now, here's a thing. If you have a plus and a minus brush, don't try to go between those. This plus and minus here, see when I'm going, that's only for that brush. So if you have a different brush and you start plus or minus, it's not going to work to take away. So just remember when you're working on that brush, that Alt or the Option key is only going to work on that brush. And of course, you can name each of these layers. And we can go in here and try and, fix it up around there, around the hair. We can go around the collar. I'm just going to do this. I went way too. Let's hit the left bracket key, make that smaller. There we go. Let's get the collar, hit the Alt or Option key for the minus. And if you have trouble with it sometimes removing, it can be the auto mask. If you just turn that auto mask off, you can just force it to do things. And let's also make sure that's set up good. Okay. And so I'm not going to try and get this perfect, but I'm just going to kind of show you as I'm going in some of these areas here. And as you can see, you could go in and you could touch this up, spend enough time in there, you get it absolutely perfect. It's going to struggle a little bit in here with the hair, to be honest. So I'm just going to go over, hit the minus, and try and do that. Now that minus will only, as you saw, I was in the neck there and I was having trouble. That's what I was trying to describe before. That minus won't remove that from there. And that's because it's not part of this brush. See, as I roll over, that's the brush. If I roll over, this is the close. So see how that area went over? That was on the close. So what you have to do is choose subtract and then grab a brush. And then I can subtract from these other areas. So maybe if you're confused with that sometimes, let's go there. I went a little too far. So just remember, each brush is unique to itself. Sometimes that could be a little bit confusing. But if you're not getting it removing, that's because it was not part of that brush. It was part of that close selection. So when you roll over and you see that overlay, that can show you where that mask is. So if you want to remove it from those areas, make sure you select that and then hit the minus. Hopefully that makes sense. And, I could continue on the shoulder and stuff, but I think you get the general idea. So, we can go here, backslash key. There we are before, after, able to change the color of her shirt pretty easily here. And this is, with braids, if she didn't have all the braids and everything here, this would be much, much easier. So that's kind of selecting around the hair. So it's not necessarily a simple example. All right. So what else can we do here? Oh, here's something that's really fun. Working with lighting. So for example, here's this one. And if, we look at, here's the before, and then here's the after. Notice I was able to create a shaft of light, but not just that, but actually even be able to add the light onto my model here. I'll do this for you in a second, but I just want to show you what's going on with the mask on this one. So notice I've created multiple masks here. So you can create a number of masks, and we can just hide all of these if we want. Why don't we do that? So the first one I did is I used the mask to create that beam. Notice that the beam is only on the background. Once again, I'm going to show you how to do this in just a moment. So we created that beam of light just on the background. Then I wanted to kind of spread that out a little bit. So now we've got the light is kind of hitting her hat. And notice it goes a little bit more, because this is what would be happening if you got that beam of light maybe coming from a window. And then we've got, more of that area. So I've just kind of created another mask, which just kind of, it's a little bit of floodlight kind of coming, because if there's a light from that window, unless it's if it's, very, very dark and there's just a very narrow shaft of light, maybe you wouldn't get that spread, but there's a little fill light there. And in here, notice what I'm doing there. Look on her dress. And over there, let me just find that right one. See a little bit of rim light there. It's kind of, and then a little bit on that arm there. All right. So let's go for another example here, and let's create some light just to kind of show you how that works. And it's really quite amazing. All right. So let's go under the develop. And what we want to do is we're going to grab I want to put a light in the background, just kind of like what we saw before. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our selection here, and I want to select the background, but maybe the fastest way to do that is to select the subject. And now I could go through and I could refine the subject and I could make it really good. And I'm not going to spend the time to do that right now, but I just want to give this to you as an additional tip. If you went through it and you refined this and you wanted to reuse it, what you would do is you would rename it and you would call it, I'm going to call it refined. So this is a little bit more of an advanced workflow, but I think because I want to do stuff for people that are newer and also stuff that maybe people are familiar with mask. So this is a tip for people that are more familiar with a mask. So you would go through, you would use a brush or whatever, and you would refine it and you would get this really nice. Then what you do is you don't use it. Once you've got that one really nice, then what you would do is you would just duplicate that mask here. And then you would keep that refined and then just use that selection for later on. So I'm going to hide that and just pretend that we refined it. So it's not going to be perfect. We'll probably have some sizzlies around the edges and stuff, but just bear in mind that that could be perfected. All right. So now that we've done that, we would just reuse that, so we don't have to do all that work over and over again. All right. So what I want to do is I want to actually invert that, because I want to select the background. So I'm going to invert. So we'll select just the background. Now, here's a really useful tool. What I want to do is I want to create that light beam. But what we're going to do for that is we're going to use a different type of light, and we're going to use it in a different way. I'm not going to add or subtract. What I'm going to do is I'm going to intersect. And an intersection, what that does is that works just where everything overlaps. So just checking my messages, making sure we're still working here. Good. All right. So what I want to do is I want to affect it only where I overlap with this new tool. So I don't want to add or subtract. What I'm going to do is hold down the Alt or Option key, and now we see the ability to intersect. And I'm going to use a radial gradient. So notice that icon shows an intersect. So now this is only, notice as I create that mask, where it intersects, which is the background, and this mask is the only area that's going to be adjusted. So that's a really wonderful tool, is this intersection. And we're going to use it extensively now. So I'm going to create this shaft of light. And I'm just going to drag it over here. We can change the size of it. And notice it's not affecting Colin, our model. It's only affecting that background. Just the area where those two overlap. Nowhere else. And why is it working on the background? Because the background is selected. We've masked the background. All right, so we could change the angle of this. We could do all kinds of things. Let's just go in here, and the feather here, we could make that sharper, or we can make it very, very soft. Let's make it a little bit harder. And let's adjust that amount a little bit. All right, so we've got light coming down here. Now, what if we want to have some light also hitting our model? So what I would do is I would go to our model, and I want to duplicate. Now, if I wanted to just select the background, by the way, I could duplicate and invert, and it would select that background, but we're going to duplicate it here, and we're going to turn it on. So here's our model selected once again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to also intersect. But this time I'm going to intersect on our model. I'm not going to intersect with the background. So here's our mask. Remember, the only areas that are going to be affected are the areas where both that mask and the new mask overlap. So hold down the Alt or the Option key. We're going to choose intersect. And now we're going to grab a brush. And I'm going to make this brush big. By the way, left bracket key makes it smaller, right bracket key makes it bigger. The reason I say that is because if you change the size here, you can't really see what it's doing. But if you're on your image and you change this now, you can see exactly what that brush is going to do. So what I'm looking for is I want to kind of just kiss the edges with that feather there. All right, great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the exposure up just a little bit. And you'll notice as I do that, it affects our model, the whole model, right? But watch this. As soon as I touch this, boom, now only the intersected area, look at this, is going to be adjusted. So this makes it really easy to add, some light or some rim light without worrying about having to, just be careful. We can just be super loose with our selections here, our selections, our painting, because it's constrained now to this intersect. So we can adjust that. So if you wanted to have, blowing out the light, obviously we're not going to do that, but there might be times you need to do that. But see how now we can go in here and we can adjust that light. If we wanted to give a little bit of color, we could warm that light up a little bit, give it a nice warmer light. See that? And then if we wanted to do the same with the background, we could select that. And we could also warm up the temperature on that as well. See that? So the mask gives us the ability to go in and do a lot of really useful things. And as we can see here, that's working good. If we didn't like it everywhere, we could just hit this minus. And what I'm doing, by the way, if you look when we're using this brush, when we go into the eraser, see right now, it goes between erase and brush. While I'm holding down the Alt key, what it's doing is the settings are going to change. So I'm on these settings right now, and I might say, hey, you know what? I want to take this density or the flow down. So I'm going to take the flow down, which what does that mean? That means as I paint away, it's not going to remove all of it. I can just remove partial. So what I can do now is I can start to blend my adjustments. So we're blending those adjustments in now because I feel like it's a little much here. I don't want to completely remove it maybe from that area, but just reduce it. And so these are, just different ways we can work with these masks. And if we look at what we've been doing here, there's a before and an after. I guess that was another before because I put a blue light there. But you can see, we're able to go in and create these rim lights and different types of lights. So it's a really nice option. All right, let's continue and let's look at something else. Let me show you something that's kind of interesting with these masks. Let's grab this particular shot. So these are all just straight out of camera. You can see these are raw files. Let me go to develop and just hit reset. Right. Okay. So maybe not the best expression, but I just wanted to grab one of the photos. That's fine. So as you can see, it's a raw file straight out of camera. This is how I shot it. And by the way, if you use a light meter, your exposure should be pretty good. I'm surprised how many people don't use light meters. Why don't you drop a comment and let us know? Do you use a light meter or do you like to waste a ton of battery on your flash until you can get the correct exposure? Or are you one of those magical people that can just see light and you can just see exactly how much exposure you need by looking at it, which I'm saying that almost facetiously because I hear people saying that. And if you're shooting the same subjects in with the same lighting in the same studio all the time, yes, you are going to know what the exposure settings are. But the rest of the time, you're going to be I like to use a light meter. Anyway, moving along. So I'm going to grab the mask here and we're going to detect the person. I see we've got a couple of people using light meters there. Yeah, and if you haven't tried them, really try it. It will revolutionize your workflow. I used to shoot without a light meter. Then I started using a light meter, and now you nail it. You get one shot, and you pretty much dial it in, boom, hit it again, and your exposure's perfect. They're really good. All right, particularly if you're working with a client that doesn't have the patience to sit there for 15 minutes and 10 shots while you're trying to get the proper exposure. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm just going to grab the facial skin here, and just to show you what we can do for retouching. There's not really any teeth here, but let's grab teeth a little bit in there. Lips. We could grab eyebrows, eye sclera, which is the whites of the eyes, iris and pupils. So let's grab all of these, and we're going to create a mask. Notice what it does is it creates a separate mask for each of those parts of that person. Now, the reason I wanted to go in here is I'm going to show you something. Now, one of the things that they'll, if you know anything about retouching, one of the things you don't do is you don't blur the skin. Like in Photoshop, you go in and then you grab a Gaussian blur, and then I've seen magazine covers like that at Albertsons and different places, and it's kind of embarrassing. But the newer texture slider is not a typical blur. What it does is the texture actually works on a slightly lower frequency, meaning a less detailed. So the highly, what we would call the high frequency would be the really fine details. And those really fine details could be like the pores in the skin, different things like that. And your sharpness is actually going to go into that area. So if you do a negative sharpness, that would be like doing a blur. But the texture slider was actually originally designed for working with skin tones. So if we look at this, you don't go all the way across here because obviously it looks really, really bad. But if we go just a little bit, see how we can start to just reduce some of just soften the skin a little bit. Look at that. Let's go back here and just gently reduce it a little bit. So you want to be subtle with that. And so we could, do that. We could go in here. I don't think we really need to do a lot else, but let's go to the eyes. One of the things I see people doing sometimes, and it just makes me laugh, because I used to do it when I first started using Photoshop, like 30 years ago. White eyes. So you go like that. And now what you're doing is you've got this gold just going around glowing eyes. So what you want to do to get rid of the reds in the eyes, I'll just turn it overlay over. There's not much in there. Let's go to 200%. Maybe there's a little bit of veins in there, but not much. What you want to do is you want to just reduce the saturation. So take the saturation down. That's it. That's really what you want to do. If there's some, very predominant veins, you could go in here and you could use some of the remove tools to get rid of those. But generally speaking, if I turn that up, you can see there's, the color in the veins. The saturation, bringing the saturation down is usually all you need to do for the whites of the eyes. Anyway, let's continue. So I could go in here and I want to hit these parts. Let's add a little bit to the color. So sometimes opening up the shadows a little bit. See how the shadows can just, not taking the exposure and doing that because that looks terrible. But if we take the shadow, it can just kind of open it up a little bit. And maybe even in some instances, just a touch of saturation, not a lot. And we're just enhancing the eyes. So, we can just kind of make those pop a little bit. So if we look at this, before and after, see how it's just subtle. But look at the changes on her, subtle changes. All right, so we're going through and we're doing this retouching. So here's one of the really cool things about this is, once we zoom out, maybe it's a little strong there. I think it's a little strong. Let's go in here and go back to the face mask. And I'm just going to pull back a little bit. Let's go down. So maybe the texture, I got a little heavy handed with that. There we go. All right. So the thing is, once you've done this, you can actually save this as a preset now. And so if you save this as a preset, you can actually go in here and create a preset, and we could call it minimum retouch. And if you look in here, we've got the masking. You could turn all these masks on, and it will remember those settings within those masks. And then this is what's known as an adaptive preset. I'll show it on a better subject in just a moment so you can see how it works. But you could batch process this. So all you got to do is retouch one person, batch process it, and then it'll go through, and you don't have to do this on every single person every time. In fact, let me show you how that works right now. So I'm just going to hit the G key for the grid view. And there's a series of pictures here, all the same model, Colin. Let's just grab one of them. Let's grab, I don't know, this one. Um, I don't know, or grab this. It doesn't matter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to development just to show you how this works. Maybe we'll just do a hair selection because it'll just be really, really obvious because the fine retouches might not. But just remember, you can do this with any of the tools. So let's go through here and we're going to let it detect the person. And once the person's detected, we're going to go down, we're going to grab the hair, and we're going to create a mask just for the hair. Now, remember, you could have done the eyes, the skin, teeth, whitening the teeth, whatever. Once again, whitening the teeth, you want to use the saturation, reduce the saturation first before you do any exposure adjustments. Maybe you could give it a slight boost on exposure on some teeth, but be very, very careful. Saturation is usually a better way of removing those kind of issues. All right, so let's go in here under hue. We'll change the color of it here. Let's go for somewhere in here. And as you can see, you can easily change, colors of different things here. So there's a hair color that I see quite often. It's quite a common kind of a color around here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the G key so we can see it. But it makes it easy for you now to see what's going to happen here. So I'm going to grab some of these. Let's grab some different ones. Let's grab some with hats. Let's grab her in different clothing, just so you can see how this is going to work, how well it works across different photographs. All right, so if we look at that, let's grab one of these with, the hair and also a hat. And just to show you how well it works, this is the most selected one. I'm going to choose sync settings, and then I'm going to choose the masking here, and then I'm going to hit synchronize. And so let's just go here. So what we're doing right now is we are synchronizing these settings. So what it's doing is the AI is looking at each one of these photographs. It's selecting the hair because obviously the hair is different on each one. And it's applying the same settings that we saw there. Look at that, boom. So we can see there, look, there's the hair's changed. Look at that. So it selected that independently. And look, it did a really good job. Here's one with the hat. Now, of course, you can go through these individually and you can modify any of these individually if you want. But as you can see, I'm using hair as an example so you can easily see what's happening. But remember, you could just be whitening eyes. You could be, doing, moving skin. You could be changing colors. You could be doing anything you wanted. And as you can see, we can batch process a lot of these masks now, and it just saves a ton of time. And I could apply that to 1,000 photos, and just imagine how much time I would have just saved by doing that. All right, let's go back to our grid view, and let's see what else we've got here.
Hey, Colin, super quick question
You know
to
what I
see
want to
you.
show you? How many of you, what cameras are you all shooting? I'm curious. How many of you are using Canon? How many of you are using Sony? How many of you are using Nikon? How many of you are using, Olympus? All right, we've got some Canon shooters here. So the Canon shooters already know that there's a Sony, Nikon, Fuji. All right, great. So a lot of you know that tethering has been inside of Lightroom for a long time in Canon and Nikon. Nikon not as long as Canon. But what is new is Sony. So right now, I have just plugged in my Sony A1. I'm turning it on, and I'm choosing remote shoot, which I love that. It's a firmware update in the camera now where you can just choose what you want to do, and makes it nice and easy. Okay, so I've turned the camera on. Watch this. So if I go under Lightroom and I choose tethered capture and start tethered capture, what I'm doing is I can create a session. I can name it. I can decide where I want to save it. So this will be saving onto the desktop. And then I'm just going to click OK. Now it's going to look for the camera and look at that. It found the Sony A1. Now, for those of you who may have done tethered capture in Lightroom, Notice how quickly it selected the camera. The other thing that's really cool is if I unplug it and I plug it back in, it picks it up again. In the past, you had to restart it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit live. And with live, look at this. We can see out of the camera live. And I'll actually show you my setup. I'm actually using 3 monitors here. So these are 3 of the BenQ monitors. This one over here is actually the newest one, and that is the new design monitor. It's the PD 270. Sorry, it's the PD 3225U. And that is, I did a review on that, so you can check it out on my YouTube channel at Photoshop Cafe if you want to see my review on it. But that is the latest monitor. This is my favorite monitor right now, though. This is the photographer monitor, is SW321C. And then over here, I have the PD 276UA, which is the thing I like about it is see, it's got this articulating stand. And so look at that. It's on this arm. So I can move it around and I use this as my additional monitor for live streaming, different things like that. And also I can flip it around. Actually, all of these will flip around so I can use them for TikToks and stuff like that if I want to go into uh, portrait mode. But anyway, my point of showing you that is look at this. We are looking through this camera right now live. This is my Sony camera. And if I want to take a photo, I can take a picture. And I probably have to go out of, there we go. So why don't I make it a little brighter? So I can go in here, I can change these settings. So let's boost the ISO a little bit. Look at this. There. Now you can see easier. Look at that. So I'm able to change the settings right here on screen. I can change my shutter speed. I can change my aperture. Let's open up that. Let's go the other way. Open our aperture up. Look at this. And so look at this. We can change it right here. I can change the white balance. I can even, if I'm in manual focus, I can go in here and I can focus this. This could be on a tripod. But here's the thing. I can take a picture. And if you look at this right there, I'll just move that to my second monitor. Look at that. Took the picture very quickly. Let me show you how fast it is. Hit the shutter. See how fast that is? Let me go over this way. Take the shot. Take the shot. It's fast. And this is a 50 megapixel camera. So that's one of the things I love about that. And the other thing too is if you want to, you could put this on a tripod and you could take the picture just by clicking right there, and it will also take the picture. So anyway, I just wanted to show you that. So not only is Sony supported, but it works better than this has ever worked before previously. Because if you remember, there used to be quite a bit of lag. I remember when I used to use the Canon 5D Mark IV on here, it used to be quite laggy, but not anymore. All right, so when you're done with that, you can just go in here. I guess we'll just close that out. And I'll turn the camera off. So as you can see there, there's tethered shooting. All right, let's see what else we've got time for. We've got time for just a little bit more here. Just now I'm just trying to find my old folder I was working in. Let's go back down here. And there we go. There's the pictures we're working with. All right, so we've got a couple of other things to look at. One of them is the AI denoise. I'm going to do that really quick. So if you look at this picture here, and I'm going to go into the develop module, and I'm going to hit reset and zoom in. This is noisy. So this was shot at, where's my, oh, here we go. ISO 12,800. And so as you can see, it's quite grainy, quite noisy. And then, so one of the things they put in here is it's a new kind of a noise reduction. So we've got the manual noise reduction where we can go into luminance here, and it works pretty good. Look at that. It's not bad. Increase the contrast, the detail, trying to remove it a little bit. It's not bad. If we look at this before, after, it's definitely helped. But we do tend to lose detail when we do that. So one of the new things they put in here now is the AI based one. And let me get back to my picture. Did I just delete it? That's awesome. There we go. All right, so I'm going to reset this and let's zoom out. So we've got the ability to noise reduction. It's a one-click thing, but we can denoise. We can choose how much we want to reduce the noise. Look at this, all the way up. I'll just do kind of the middle, and I'm just going to hit enhance. So what it's going to do is it's using AI. We can see up the top there. It's generating a new DNG file, and it's going to stack it into a stack with the image that I'm using right now. And so when it's done, there it is. You'll see there's a stack there. And you'll see, let me open the stack up. So here's the original image. And then there's the noise one. You can see it changes the name to enhance. So let me show you before. And let's zoom in. Look at this. And there is, let's get to the same spot. Look at this noise in there. Let's go even crazier. Let's go 200%. And we're going to go there and look at that. So if you can see the difference between the noise reduction, it works really, really well. So that's a fun thing. Oh, I believe my sound is off. Hang on a sec. Let me just tap on my, okay, my sound is back on again. Oh, there will be a recording. Okay, great. That's good to know. All right. So what are we doing for time here? Let me just talk about one other thing, and that's HDR workflow. So HDR is come a long way, and it's advancing, and it's become mainstream now. So it's funny because a few years ago, like more than 10 years ago, maybe longer than that, I started teaching HDR in Photoshop like early. There was myself and Ben Wilmore, I believe, were some of the first two people to be teaching HDR. And this is before it became sort of a fad. And one of the things I talked about HDR was HDR is about extended dynamic range. It's a high dynamic range. It's not an effect or a filter, but what happened is it kind of this trendy, kind of grungy thing hijacked, so to speak, HDR for a while. And then what people thought or calling HDR was just an effect. And because people would say terms like, single image HDR. And, I would laugh at that because a single image HDR is like single speaker stereo. It's not possible. Because the dynamic range means how much highlight and how much shadow has been captured in the photo. And I go into all this to say this, when we're talking about HDR today, we're not talking about that HDR. Let me go into the basics here and I'll show you. This is what people used to call HDR. They'd crank the texture up, they'd crank the highlights all the way down, they would crank the shadows all the way up. And I mean, and in places that, still is an interesting effect. And then they would take that dehaze, not the dehaze, they'd take clarity, crank it all the way up. So you guys remember this, right? And this is what people used to call HDR, was just basically showing all the detail in the highlights and shadows. But the thing with that was if there was no detail captured on the sensor, see in the histogram, you can see those details in the shadows and the highlights. But if someone didn't capture those highlights, there was no way to bring those back. And by the way, this is an HDR where I merged three images together to create this HDR image. So HDR now is more about being able, look at this, being able to actually reveal the details in the highlights in the shadows. And it's become mainstream. Like most televisions now have it. A lot of your Apple devices have it now. Most of your phones have it now. And your monitors, like these three monitors that I have here, all support HDR10, which is a type of HDR. There's different standards. It's HDR10, is Dolby Vision. HDR10 is the most common type. So why am I saying all that? The reason I'm saying all that is we have the ability now to process and output high dynamic range images inside of Lightroom. Now, there's a couple of things you would need to do. First thing is you're going to go to your system settings, make sure you have monitors that support them. And then when we go under displays, like say, here's my monitor here, you'll see an option on here, high dynamic range. I could turn it on. I'm not going to turn it on because the I'm sure Zoom doesn't support it. And if you don't have a monitor that supports it, you're not going to be able to see it. But if you turn it on here, and what you can do is you can go into Photoshop. Now, this is an HDR image, meaning this is actually a 32-bit image, but I won't get into the whole explanation of it. But essentially, if you hit HDR here and you have that turned on, you're going to see in these highlights, you're going to start to see detail if you have an HDR monitor. And on the histogram here, it's going to show SDR on one side, HDR on the other side. The HDR is the extended part. And if I choose visualize, yes, not going to really show it. I'm afraid to try and turn it on my monitor. Let's turn it on in my monitor to see what happens. So I'm going to turn it on in my monitor. It's going to go black for a second, and it's going to come back on. And hopefully you guys can see it. I mean, you're not going to see the effect of it on here, but notice when I hit HDR, you'll see detail in there if you support it, and on there it's going to show more. So what happens is as you make these adjustments, see, as I'm going into this area, the standard dynamic range, this is where it will be cut off, and that's all people will see on a JPEG or a regular image. But meanwhile, we've got all this detail here, which can only be seen on an HDR workflow. So here's the beautiful thing about it. If I choose visualize HDR, it shows the areas that will get lost that people won't see. You can go into preview for SDR and you can choose a tone mapping. So people that don't have HDR are going to see that. Notice the detail here. It's not blown out to white. That detail does exist and you can set it there. But if you have a HDR monitor and an HDR workflow, you can view these more vibrant colors, and we can export them now out of Lightroom. So this is one of the newer things that they've added into Lightroom. And this is definitely we're going to choose the export option. This is going to become more and more important in the future. Eventually, everything is going to be HDR. This is the new frontier. And so when we're outputting them, we can go to the file settings. Notice that this is just blowing out. It's too bright because I've got the HDR setting on right now. Let me just quickly just turn it off just for the sake of the webinar. So let me just turn this off. This is just turning it off in the Apple interface. There we go, because it was getting too bright probably for a lot of your setups. All right, so here we go. So here, if we change this to something like a JPEG XL and AVIF, we can also do PSD, a TIFF, or we can do a ping. All of these will enable us to output to HDR. So we can turn on HDR output. And at this point here, we have 3 different gammas. The HDR Rec 2020 is going to be the best for a lot of cases. This supports more colors. HDR P3, if your monitor supports P3, it will support more colors. The smallest gamut is going to be the sRGB, but this is going to be bigger still because it's still doing an HDR output. Use these formats and then you export that image. If you put it on your website or you share that image with somebody that has an HDR workflow or looks at it on a television is now going to be able to see your image much more vibrant. They're going to see more color. They're going to see more details in the highlights, just kind of like when you're watching a show, a Netflix show or whatever. In HDR, you notice the difference. You can do that with your photographs now. And as the cameras get more dynamic range, this is just going to become the norm. And eventually, standard dynamic range is just going to look dull and flat, and everyone's going to be looking at HDR. So it's bleeding edge technology right now, but you can see that we can output that now from Lightroom, and you can put a JPEG XL on your website, and people can start to view that now if they're using the Chrome browser supports it, and it's a lot of stuff. So no, it doesn't help with prints. It's only for digital output. It's nothing to do with printing. So someone asked that question, and in fact, normally when you're printing, because you're using pigments, you already have access to colors that you don't have access to digitally a lot of time, which is why we'll do a soft proof. So this is purely digital output, not for print. Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because this is an area I don't think a lot of people are really talking about a lot right now. But get ready for this. This is the future, and and it's just going to be so nice for people to be able to display and view images in beautiful HDR, on the web and from each other. So anyway, I think we've pretty much run out of time there. I've gone over a little bit, so I'm going to just pass it back to Richie. Are you there, Richie?
Hello, hello, Colin. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, okay, yeah, thank you so much for taking your time here. Thank everyone. Say praise for the king of Adobe Lightroom real quick. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, these new features are super cool. I think the ability to add light beams and options to edit the specific articles on human subject were really helpful to see. So we'll go ahead and everyone shoot your questions. I'll start off. So Colin, which features have you enjoyed using the most from the new update, and which ones have you found the most practical?
I would say out of the latest update, the generative remove is really useful. I'm getting a lot of use out of that. I'm using it a lot. Yeah. And the masking, obviously, that masking is not brand new. But another one that I'm really, really excited about is the Sony tethering because, let's be honest, the Sony software, which is not, it's not even, I think they've retired the old app. It used to be the imaging app was terrible. Um, and Lightroom was just too slow for tethering and it didn't support Sony before. So I have clients that I shoot that insist on shooting with tethered workflow. I didn't want to use Capture One because I don't have it and I don't want to learn it. And I'm a Lightroom user, so I'm going to be using this a lot for my shoots, and even for the commercial clients that insist on working with a big television set. Also, when I'm working with models, I like to tether to my laptop, and then when I'm shooting, I'll flip my laptop around and let the model see, or even set up a second monitor. Sometimes I'll set up one of my BenQ displays facing towards the model, so as the model can see the shots and how they're coming out, it gives the models more confidence. They can see what's working as far as posing and lighting. And I usually find that the models sometimes, maybe a less experienced model, can be a little nervous at the beginning, but once they see a couple of shots, their confidence just goes up so fast. So tethering is just really useful for a lot of reasons.
Awesome, awesome. Okay. One question came in. It was back when you were applying the same changes to the series of pictures of the model, adjusting the eye color. Alan asked, will that also work in develop module?
The batch processing, yeah, absolutely. We were actually in the develop module, and you can sync it through there, or you could create a preset and you could apply the preset. You could apply it in the library module or the develop module. So yeah, that'll work either place.
Okay. And then Brett asks, are all of your monitors IPS?
Yes, yes, they are. I mentioned the model numbers before,
Mhm.
um, and they have the newest one is the what is it, 2000 2001 contrast ratio, I believe. Is that right? So that's the highest contrast one that I have, and it's also very, very bright. I've got the review on my YouTube channel, so if you want to check it out, I've actually reviewed all my monitors. But the newest one is I'm just see if I get the numbers right, the PD 3225U. And this one is very bright and very high contrast, probably more so than the other ones. I like the SW because the SW, if you're doing photography, it's really good because that one here, you can use it I believe it's 98% Adobe RGB, or 98 or 99% Adobe RGB, whereas the design monitor is 99% P3, which is what Apple uses. Also, it's kind of a different standard. So if you're doing a lot of digital work, and you're doing a lot of design work, the design monitors work very well for you. If you're a photographer and you're going to be printing, then you're probably going to be one of you using the SW monitors. So they each have different advantages in the different types of monitors depending on who you are and what you're doing, which is why I have the SW front and center, because behind me I've got a big old printer and I like to print sometimes. So that Adobe RGB is important to me for that printing.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing the distinction between the two, Colin, and your experience with those. That's great to hear. Okay, that's all the time we have today. Everyone, thank you so much for joining. Drop in where you're from. This is a great webinar. Excited to see everyone again. This webinar will be recorded. It will be posted on YouTube and sent out to all of you directly via email. So keep an eye out for that. Look forward to seeing you all next time and have a good night. Thank you again, Colin.
All right, thanks. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming.